God, you are good and we are grateful. I am so happy to be back, God, in the midst of this beautiful community that wants to experience you in new and profound ways. God, may you meet us as we continue a series where we see the encounters of the resurrected Jesus with all of the faithful disciples, from Mary to the two walking the Emmaus Road to today's Thomas story. God, may you meet us in the variety of ways that we need you, and may we see you in a variety of ways that we need to as our faith continues to deepen in you. May it be so. Amen. My first sermon as an ordained minister wasn't about Thomas, but my first one on Thomas, because it's a rite of passage. Everyone preaches on the Doubting Thomas passage. Was at a church, as I've talked about, in Manhattan Beach Community Church in Manhattan Beach, California. I know, poor me. I lived by the beach for a while. It was a rough life. But I gave that sermon, humorously enough, the week after the senior minister's wife, who actually was also a senior minister of another church, had given birth to a son named Thomas. And we had, in our church, a billboard. And so I like to have fun with my sermon titles, as you can imagine. You can imagine that, right? I would say funny things on there. So I did a play on Thomas, and we worked it out way before the birth had happened, and we knew the name of the son. So that Sunday was just so many Thomas jokes, right? Like Thomas is 3 days old. What is he doubting? You know, what's happening? But it is actually kind of appropriate to think of the amusing questions or thoughts of children. Children are so full of questions, aren't they? When they're not a little shell-shocked being up here right in front of everyone. But they're full of lots of questions. And they expect us to know all the answers. So if you've been a parent, raise your hand if you've had a moment where you're bombarded by so many questions you just didn't know what to do. Right? Like, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what's happening. And having traveled this last couple weeks, of course, you come on a plane and there are parents, and sometimes there are single parents with kids, and I'm always like, can I help you? Can I get a margarita for you? Like, what do you need, right? And there's always the kids with the questions, and they don't have the answers, right? They're not the pilot or the gate agent. They don't know what's going on, and so you see parents trying to kind of keep up with these questions. And I got to spend time with my nieces, of course, this last week. They were in a play, the two oldest. And it was a really, really fun play. And it was High School Musical version, but in high school form in a play. And so there was singing, which you know can be wonderful and go terribly wrong all at the same time, right? Yeah. But my favorite memory of my oldest niece, when she was about 3 years old, they live in Pasadena, actually Altadena. So Altadena is sort of rogue Pasadena. So Pasadena is sort of like Naperville. Lots of infrastructure, hotels, big restaurants, chain things. And Altadena is sort of the rogue version of that. Like, that's where you have horses, basically. Altadena is where you hear a goat bleating, you hear, dogs are out, it's sort of a little more cowboy-esque, I shall say. And so we were playing one day, and I used to nanny her when she was little because I was a pastor and I got Mondays off. And as you do, I like to drive up for an hour on a Monday and be with her, and it was really fun. And so she was playing, and I looked up, and there was like just a horse. And by the time we looked up, the horse was being led away, and so you only really saw the horse, and you're just like, what's happening? And I looked at her and I said, where do you think that horse is going? And she's like, to find his cowboy. Anyway, and then it just didn't faze her at all. Kids say the darndest things. That could be the sermon title. But anyway, when we come to Thomas and the idea of doubting, I like to lean on theologian and philosopher and my friend Pete Rollins. He lives in Europe right now. He coined this phrase and wrote a book about doubt. He coined this phrase that I often use when I teach or in confirmation classes, and it is this: to believe is human, to doubt is divine. To believe is human, to doubt is divine. We live, of course, in a culture of fast comebacks and slick advertisements and deep, deep assuredness. Do you get that sense? Like, people rarely say, I don't know, right? People often say, oh, I know, and I know what you should know, and I know what they know, and I know what I know, right? Very certain. Especially in politics. We won't go down that road necessarily, but it's very rare for you to see a politician flustered and not know the answer or not thought ahead of the answer. Well, I mean, Maybe that changed a little bit in the last few years, but in general, politicians are needing to understand the answer even before the question comes, right? That's kind of what we live in. To be caught off guard is not how we like to be. Even pastors can be that way, right? Maybe knowing the answer before asking the question, leaning into certainty, right? Saying, I know all the answers. Because saying something ambiguous can be a little more difficult. In the age of information, unfortunately, I think this has shaped, like I said, modern Christianity. Anticipate the questions, know the answers. In fact, if I'm honest, and maybe some of you are honest, in your background in faith, you grew up, and I grew up, certainly, you may not have, I grew up reading books about, here are all the answers, right? Here is how you actually persuade yourself that God is real. And then here's the 10 ways to persuade other people. Did anyone ever read those sort of books or believe those sort of things or hear about that? I wasn't given leave to ask many questions. I was told, here are the things you need to believe. And it made me feel a little boxed in, right? When you search for meaning and purpose, I think things are supposed to get a little bit messier. What do you think? They're supposed to get a little messier. So this week, when I got back, I, of course, had to catch up on Ted Lasso, as you do. Who watches Ted Lasso online? Raise your hand. No. So, again, it's maybe not a show for kids. It's on Apple TV. But the thing I love about this show, first of all, I don't think we deserve it. It's so fun. But is the idea that if you don't know, that basically the premise is this brutal divorce happens with this British couple. The wife, who you meet at the beginning, is very interesting. And she has decided that she is going to take away the thing that he loves because he cheated on her and it was embarrassing. And so she hires Ted Lasso, who is a football coach, right? This kind of football, right? This kind of football, to come to England and coach this kind of football, which is a little different. And so she does that because she actually wants to humiliate him and the team. So that's kind of what and I'm giving away a little of the plot, but it's been out for like 4 years, so you had your chance to watch the first season. I recommend you do. And so this last few years, it's been all about how do you make this team win? How do you make this team successful? And so there's been various ways in which they have had plans and put people in positions. And this year we got a fancy guy named Zava, and that was a fun kind of discursion. But what it made me think about today, and relating it to Thomas, is the idea that oftentimes we want to trust in something that we feel like is certain. But what's so beautiful about Ted Lasso in the last episode is that actually they're starting to change their tactics. They're starting to actually find a new way to play together as a team. And what we find is that this whole time, it's been building up to this idea of trust, right? So when you have a soccer team or a football team, and again, I'm not a coach or into the sports ball all that much, but what I do know is that you have a plan, right? You know where people are going to stand, you know where people are going to hit, people are going to be defensive and offensive. See, I know words. And usually those things are set, am I right? This is an offensive person, this is a defensive person, and they're in those positions because they're good at those roles. But what's happening is you see in Ted Lasso, in the last episode, is they're actually starting to say, let's see what each moment requires, and then do that thing. Because what is happening is they are trusting in themselves and in their team more than they are trusting in this certainty or process with which you would win a game. And so there's beautiful doubt and uncertainty in that. And it made me really think about, because I actually didn't put it in my sermon notes, what it means for us to trust in something that's greater than any one singular person. And it got me thinking about it, right? As a church, as a community, we have many people that do many things here. And over the years, different people have done different things here. And yet God is still God. And beauty has still happened. Worship will happen. Mission will happen. Service will happen. Connection will happen. And we trust in the God who is in charge of those things, not necessarily in any one plan we could have had about it. that God brings in each moment the way it is. And I think Thomas shows us that, right? In this passage in John 20, it tells the story of Jesus' of course, post-resurrection appearance to the disciples in the house where they met. And of course, the doors are locked. Why are the doors locked? Because they're afraid, right? They're probably on what we would call the most wanted list. Their leader is dead. Their hopes and dreams have also died with him. And so there is this festival all around them. It's happening because remember, leading up to this, leading up to the Jesus parade, right? There are festivals happening, which is why this is the time that's been chosen for this to happen. So people are still celebrating Passover. People are still celebrating all these things. And they're hearing these rumors now. The women at the tomb were there. They've told some interesting stories, right? And so they are, at this moment at least, on the losing side of history. And so they're afraid, and the door's closed. Yet they still meet to figure it out. And there's no easy answers when your best friend and your most inspirational leader is humiliated and killed. However, this is the powerful post-resurrection moment in our story where we proclaim Christ is risen. What's so interesting is we know in a fact that Jesus outlives the Roman Empire that has just overtaken him. And Jesus comes into their locked room when their fear is high, where their worry is high, where their trust is probably very low. And what does he say? Peace be with you. No treaty, no, let me tell you what's happened the last 3 days. No huge explanation, maybe that I would want. Peace be with you. And their hopes and dreams continue to be shattered for a new hope and a new dream. And so, of course, Thomas was not with them. He doesn't believe. And we don't know why Thomas was there, right? But the gospel shows him to be no coward. Sometimes people talk about that. He wasn't there. He needed to see proof. Well, you know that in the Lazarus story, Thomas is the one who says, let us also go that we may die with Jesus. So earlier in the Gospels, Thomas is shown to be, kind of bardarse. He's kind of a cool guy, right? So he's someone who has had no fear up to this point. And again, we remind ourselves this gospel is written down probably 70 or so years after. And you think to yourself, what are they trying to tell us in the Gospel of John? And I think it's this. Because there are two temptations for us when we become people of faith, people who follow a book, an ancient book full of stories of God's people. There's a couple temptations for us. I think the first temptation, and the disciples had it after Jesus rose again and was resurrected, and they saw him. It was still hard to believe. There's a temptation to have faith without doubt, right? In this camp, Thomas has been dubbed universally sort of doubting Thomas. He's mostly criticized for his reaction to the news. Come on, Thomas. You needed to believe just hearing the story. Why can't Thomas just fall in line? Why can't Thomas just believe? There should be no doubts. There should only be faith. Have you ever heard a sermon that says, don't be like doubting Thomas? Maybe you haven't. I hope you haven't. I have. Don't be like doubting Thomas. But also, there's an equally opposite temptation for us to have doubt without faith. Just doubt and question everything. Have you met people like that as well? Just doubt and question everything. In this camp, Thomas is a hero who was held up because he questioned Jesus. Thomas doesn't have faith. He has only the facts. And we want to make everything into sort of an intellectual exercise where we know the answer. We know exactly how it's supposed to be. We have control over the situation. But we think about that actually Thomas may be showing us a better way, a third way, faith with doubt. That actually doubt and faith are not mutually exclusive or opposites. That actually doubt can often be the gateway to a deeper faith. Asking questions with sincerity, asking questions and willing to see the answers, asking questions and willing to meet with the Christ who rose, made sure that Thomas had an incredible experience. I feel sort of jealous for Thomas. He got his own experience, right? Jesus came and met with the whole group and was like, here, big group, I'm here, you know. And then Thomas gets this personalized, I'm here. You had questions and doubts. Let me allay those. I'm here, touch me. He gets that experience. And I call it sort of the divine dance of doubt. That we're constantly in our life of faith not certain about everything, because that's not what faith is, right? Faith is actually sort of the opposite of certainty. We are constantly in that divine dance of doubt, where we're asking questions, where we're going, I'm not sure. And we're getting answers and experiences. Sorry. I didn't have tequila, I promise. Jesus was raised in a tradition where doubting and questioning were a part of the deal. Everything was questioned. And so my challenge to you is that doubt is the doorway to a deeper faith. That actually asking questions, leaving a little bit of the control away, is actually the way that we meet God in a powerful way. And so I get back to Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is in this season, if you haven't watched it again, you don't have to, but he's in this season where he's brought them trust. And so now they're doing this sort of soccer that actually means they don't have the whole thing planned out each game, which is very scary. It's a world-class soccer team, right? Lots is riding on it. But what they've done is said, we trust in one another, we trust in this process, and we know ultimately that we have each other's backs. And I think there's something beautiful about that. That we understand that whatever questions or doubts or worries or concerns, that first of all, God cares and answers them, but that God has it no matter what it is. And that for every situation, God is present in a unique and different way. That we don't always do things the way we've always done them, but we always know that the God who's been there before is here now, will be there then. And so my prayer and my hope is that we become people like Thomas, who doubt when it's appropriate, who question when it's appropriate, but also lean into the deep truth of our experience with God. I have a pastor friend who says this about Christianity and doubt. Doubt is a vital part of our faith heritage, which we have lost in this world of religious and scientific fundamentalism, and the illusion in both traditions of apprehending the truth of the fullness of who we are. Doubt and questioning were not the dirty words they are today in certain circles. Again, Jesus did not transfer information to the disciples like some rote thing where he asked them to memorize things. Instead, he said, you have heard it said, but I say, peace be with you. You've heard it said, you think this is true, or you think this happened, or whatever. I'm here to show you a different way. Again, questions are the gateway to everything that we can experience with God that is new. Questions allow us to actually interact with God, which is what God wants. If we go through life with certainty, then there's no reason to be vulnerable and to say, I don't know, and to maybe learn something new. Again, Thomas is a beautiful example who wants to be responsible for his own faith journey, his own information. He doesn't want to hear it secondhand. He wants to experience God for himself. And of course, what does he proclaim? Oh, good, I found the truth. No, he says, my Lord and my God. The experience of meeting with Jesus elevated his understanding of who God was, because I think doubt, again, is the doorway to a deeper faith. Doubt is not the antithesis of faith. My Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. Faith and doubt going hand in hand. Again, we know that God is strong enough to be with us. We know that God is strong enough to hear our questions. And my prayer and my hope is that you know I will never be here to give you all the answers. For some of you, that's terrifying. Because I think you hired me, you're like, I hope she has all the answers. But here we are on a divine dance together. That I hope you question everything. And I hope you see that God is bigger than all of this. and that God is in the midst of all of our doubts and questions and concerns. And I love the example of Thomas, and I hope you take it to heart. His questions were honest and heartfelt, not cynical. And I think because of that, we actually receive a special blessing today. Did you hear it? Right? Blessed are you, beloveds, who have not seen and have yet believed. Blessed are you. Because of Thomas, we get this post-resurrection, thousands of years later blessing. We get a blessing from God because Thomas dared to ask the question and want the experience for himself. And so we get that blessing. Blessed are you. Do you feel that blessing today? Blessed are you who have not seen and touched and yet still believe. Blessed are you, beloveds. So blessed are those who doubt, who question, who seek, and have faith to say, God is Lord. I hope that you will with me say, thanks, Thomas. Amen.